And the DNA of the congregation, as you know, we talk about often, was set that we are people who are about the worship of God and the making of disciples, those two things. So for these, and into our third century, we continued that important mission. If you give me the church facade, excellent. So why Sure Foundation? Why are we talking about Sure Foundation now? It is the 200th anniversary of the building of the church. So remember, the congregation started in 1809. Church was started in 1817, completed in 1818. So from June to May, so a little less than a year, or much less than a year, the entire church was built from laying the cornerstones of construction to the dedication and consecration. And that's important. It doesn't mean much to us these days, but in the old days, you didn't dedicate or consecrate a church not until it was finished built, but when it was paid for. And it was built at a cost of $29,000, and I did one of those quick Google, what would that be today? Only $500,000, so I don't know if they just got a really good deal or not. But it's amazing to think of that construction happening in such a short time. The stories are that remember that the church is built on a spring, like much of Old Town. The water table is very high. So one of the things that they had to do early on that wasn't factored into the building itself was below us, deep in the earth, there is a reservoir that fills up and empties with water. So they had to sort of build that big pool underneath the church before even starting the foundation above it. And countless vestries throughout the years can attest to the fact that it's still an issue. This water still is an issue for us, but we're working hard at trying to preserve and keep this magnificent facility. And notice that is an old picture of the facade. You see all the dirt and the grime, and it's pre-renovation too, because the door of Norton hasn't changed yet.
Audio's working.
Audio's working.
So there you go.
Well, okay.
It's a miracle.
It is a miracle.
I heard audio, so there you go.
Yeah, I did too.
Good. Okay, so in that case, for the 200th anniversary of the church, so this would be 2009, we did a video. And I'm going to show you just pieces of it today as we talk about the Sure Foundation year in terms of the church itself. But it's stunning to be looking back that all of those images are there in that video as well. So we're going to look a bit about our history, but first the beginning section. There's a much younger rector in this.
Did you have hair?
No, never. You never had a rector with hair. Sunday, November 12, 1809, a small fledgling group of our forebears gathered together to hear the Word of God and to pray together. They gathered at a small vacant meeting house on South Fairfax Street to rally around their beleaguered pastor who had just resigned as the rector of Christ Church. We don't know exactly what happened that caused the dispute that led to his resignation, but what we do know is that gathering there on that day, those people planted the seeds of a new congregation in Alexandria. And now, 200 years later, we are still harvesting the benefits and the fruits of their labor. As we prepare to enter our third century, it is important to take time to give thanks and celebrate the great heritage of faith that we have been given by those who have gone before us. We have been entrusted with this great gift so that we might enliven the mission of the church in our own generation, but also to build on the sure and solid foundation of faith for those yet to come. As we enter our bicentennial year, there will be many opportunities for us to give thanks for all the gifts that we have been given, this heritage of faith, and to count our many blessings and to recall our history. We will also have the opportunity to rededicate and recommit ourselves to the mission of the church that is ever before us. From its beginnings, St. Paul's has been a congregation that has understood its fundamental work is to make disciples, disciples who will worship God, care for one another, and serve the world in Christ's name. That is as true today as it was on that very first Sunday. So it is with deep gratitude that we mark this milestone of St. Paul's, 200 years of shining as a light in the world to the glory of God. This is our story.
And so it begins. Remember that our Shore Foundation year in celebration of the building, the 200th anniversary of the building, started in May of this year. And those of you who are here for that Sunday, remember that we did a reenactment of the laying of the cornerstone. And many of the first families representatives were here. There were a couple groups missing. If we were to have done it exactly like they did it 200 years ago, we tried, but we couldn't get them here. One was the local Masonic Lodge. Masons laid that cornerstone. And then lots of city representatives. So in that day, it was a huge deal. There was a procession to come to the corner and lay the foundation stone, which all the other stones would keep off of that stone. But one of the stories that didn't get told that day is the story of the master mason who came, was at the time the senior warden at Christ Church. So he was laying on the cornerstone of the church that broke away. And I tell that story because it would seem that there would be great enmity, even in that very close time. That was not the case. Very soon after the split, the congregations began doing things together, doing mission projects together, doing education things together. And on that day of the dedication that would happen a year later, again, a big citywide event with lots of folks here. I think there were over 40 people confirmed here that day as well. About half of them were from Christ Church. They weren't from the new congregation. So even in its infancy, it seems as if some working reconciliation began to happen. So that's how we started the year. We've got a good year planned ahead. So today, let's see. Michael Pope will be here on October 1st, and we've asked him to give us the sense of what's happening in Alexandria at the time of the founding of St. Paul's Church. What are the issues at play? And remember, he's written several books about Alexandria history, one of them being about the War of 1812, which plays in, so I'm sure he'll talk a bit about that. And then on November 5th, we'll talk about the saints of St. Paul's and do some things from the archives. We're reworking the archives and categorizing and cataloging all the things that we have. But we realize that many of you never see them because they're locked away in a fireproof safe, two safes actually, that are in Greg's office. So we'll get out some things so that you can actually see and touch them. We have a bit of a teaser here today, so we hope that we end early so that you can come and touch and see some of these things, and we'll talk about them in a moment. In Lent, we have a Lenten series, Foundations of Our Faith. We're going to talk about Paul, whom the church is named, our beloved apostle. In the materials that went out this week, I love that Greg called him, in quotes, the apostle we love to hate. We'll get to know St. Paul a little more intimately with Dr. Kathy Green. And in conjunction with that, we're going to read a Pauline book together, Karen Armstrong's latest, St. Paul, the Misunderstood Apostle. It is a phenomenal book. It's slim, it's readable, and it's really quite good. I think it's a masterwork in terms of modern scholarship about the Apostle Paul. And then this is Pentecost, May 20th, Bishop Griswold, the former presiding bishop Frank Griswold, will be with us again. Remember, he was with us last year. He'll be with us again. And what we're going to do when he's here on Pentecost is do a rededication of the church. Not many of us have ever seen a dedication or consecration of a church. It hardly ever happens in this day and age, but it is a marvelous liturgy that we will rededicate ourselves and the space to the worship of God and to the making of disciples. And we have some excerpts of that liturgy just so you get a sense of how things happen. So we start with a prayer. Through the ages, Almighty God has moved his people to build houses of prayer and praise, to set apart places for ministry of his holy word and sacraments. With gratitude for the building, we are now gathered to dedicate and consecrate it in God's name. If you'll go to the next slide, what happens is that the doors of the church are shut, and the bishop with the staff knocks on the door, boom, 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 and asks that the doors of the church be open for all to enter. And so the liturgy begins. And one thing I love about it is that it captures all the ministries of the church. So the warden is the first to talk about, Lord Jesus Christ, make this a temple of your presence and a house of prayer. It goes to the rector or minister in charge. And then we begin processions around the church. First to the font. So that's the place where we start, where we become one with Christ. Then we go to the pulpit where we hear God's word, the lectern and pulpit. And then onto the altar for the sacraments. So it's a service that is moving, beautiful, and it will be wonderful to experience that in our own space. So make plans now, Pentecost, May 20th, 2018, to be here. Greg, you want to say anything about other commemorations? Will you speak to this?
I will, yeah. So we're wanted to kind of unite all the many things happening around St. Paul's as part of this Sure Foundation year, reminding us of all the things that are foundations of our faith. So we have a clever little take it home, put it on your fridge if you still do that. If you're a digital person, it was emailed out too, so you have that digitally. And this isn't everything by any stretch of the imagination, but it's some of the things we really want to draw your attention to. And it just shows how diverse the programs are this year. Everything from the blessing the animals with this photo that will haunt me until the day I die. No animals, dog licking my face off. To Advent wreath making, we're taking a concerted effort to do more intergenerational things during this time. And all of the many lectures, the Latrobe lecture, the Horn lecture, all of that is in here. So that's the first thing about the program here. And the next thing is, like Lauren said, we're going through these archives and we're pulling out some things to just kind of commemorate these 200 years and just see all the things that have happened in this building for 200 years. So if you don't mind where I'll drive. Here's just a sampling. I didn't want to give away everything, but I was wowed by some of this stuff. I don't think anybody's seen these photos before. These are taken by Al Forstall, Louise Forstall's late husband. And I put these three together because this is the search in 1988 for, anyone? Can anyone guess? Not boring. The columbarium. Looking for a place to do the columbarium. And at one point, I'll use the pointer here, they looked at what's now the Hoof Atrium. That's what it used to look like back then. And there they are sitting there, and that's John Cole, right there. And right there, too. Still have the mustache. And so they thought, looks like they considered very hard doing the columbarium there, and then the one on the far left is actually where the columbarium ended up, at the St. Paul Cemetery. So there's things like that that was unearthed. And Al Forstall, to his credit, kept everything extremely organized. I mean, these are all hard copy photos we've got digitized, but he put them in almost like a card catalog, detailing what everything is, the dates and all that. And then these, I brought hard copies of because these are just amazing. This is the ordination of John von Hebert to the priesthood in 1965. And that's John, I'll use this side now. That's John, and that's Bishop Gibson doing the examination there. And I believe that's Leon Whaler, right? Right there?
Yes.
Yes. And you can see already right there the old chancel, the chancel as it was in the early 60s with the choir in the chancel. And then the altar also also from the ordination, the altar against the wall. This is where the big cross is now. There's the choir up there. Fascinating. So we start to just delve into these photos and you just start to uncover this 200-year-old story. And I just love this 60s design. It looks like Saul Bass was paid to do the design of our bulletins back then, but that's the bulletin for the ordination. And then a really sweet letter from John some years later. We don't have a date on it, but I'm assuming it's towards the end of his tenure here. He wrote a letter to Louise and Al thanking them for these mementos. So some of those are up here you can actually touch. Or you want to say a little bit about the book? Sure. And I'll say the coin here was unearthed in the renovation this summer. And it's a coin from 1787, a New Jersey coin. It's not worth that much money. I know you all immediately want to go, wait a minute. Not worth that much money, but it's neat to just kind of get a little piece of the 18th century. And in the book,
Yeah, I was hoping the coin would pay for the new HVAC project. When you think about that, though, there's a coin minted in the time before there was a federal currency. That's kind of amazing. And to find it there in our courtyard is pretty amazing. This is a 1789 prayer book. It would have been the prayer book that was used when the church was founded. Remember that this would have been the second American prayer book. So immediately after the Revolution, just some quick changes were made, taking out any of the monarchs and putting in a president, some just quick kinds of things. But then a thoroughly American prayer book was put together. And the thing I love about this, and it's a reminder of why we have those plaques in the front of the church. Most people didn't have prayer books. It was not something they owned. They were expensive to have. They weren't there in the pews when you came. So they figured that all you needed to know were the 10 Commandments, the Apostles' Creed, and the Lord's Prayer. So if you needed to look up and have some help, it was there. But that's really all you needed to follow the service. But for the fortunate folks did have these books. And this is a handmade book. You'll see the marbleized paper in the beginning. One of the things that I find curious about reading it is that in terms of the prayers for ordinary life that people would have prayed, the majority of them are for prayers at sea. Makes sense? I don't think about that anymore. Prayers at sea. And there are 3 baptismal services in this book. One for infants, one for emergencies, and one for, I love this, those of riper years. So that's here for you to look at as well.
and one not to time, pun intended, is the swag. Can't have a Sure Foundation year without Sure Foundation swag. So you've seen the ties. Tucker's displaying one right now. And ties and the totes were to commemorate the Sure Foundation year too. So take a look at those and consider getting some.
Okay. So I want to set the stage for the founding of the church in 1809. So we're going to take a vast sweep through church history, 2,000 plus years in about 30 seconds or so to get us to 1809. And the image I'd like for us to keep in mind is the image of a tree, a seed that grows into a sapling, into a tree. And I know I'm mixing images here, but we'll get back to the Sure Foundation. But think about the ground being prepared. So God, in all of creation, created everything good, created us in their image, but we fell away, and countless times God called us back through prophets and sages and martyrs throughout all of His generation. But all of that was to prepare the soil, to get ready for the one who would come to change all of that. So Jesus being that seed that comes into the soil, the incarnate Word of God, fully human, to live among us, to preach, to pray, and to heal. And it would be through His death. And He uses the words Himself about unless a seed falls into the ground and dies, it doesn't become what it's meant to be. And He believes that to be true about Himself, that Jesus would die and be resurrected and begin this new life. So we think about Jesus, the seed, the sapling, moving into being a tree. But in the early church years, let's think again below the ground, there were followers of Jesus that were disciples who became apostles. They were ones who followed Jesus and then became the ones who were sent out to tell the world about Jesus. And so this root system was getting in place, all underground until about 313 or thereabouts, when Roman Empire made Christianity legal. Remember, it was illegal before then. So we started to sort of poke up out of the ground. And then for like 1,000 years after, that first 1,000 years, there was a unified church. But I'm speaking very generally now in terms of dates and history. There was lots of turmoil. There were church councils. There were a lot of things to figure out about who this Jesus was and what it meant that He would die and rise again, and what it meant for us to be the church in the world. But again, for that first 1,000 years, church, and then that major split between east and west. So this tree is maturing, getting taller, and then that first split is between east and west, that great schism. And if we keep moving out that western branch, 500 years more, about 1,500, the Reformation. And we're celebrating Martin Luther now. This year is his 500th anniversary of his nailing of the thesis. And so this began the Reformed movement of Christianity, of which we are a part. Remember, those were nationalistic, most of them, and so a form happened in English Christianity, and so we're part of that branch of this tree that, again, starts with Jesus, okay? See where we are. And then with the move of colonialism, 1607, so we get off of that branch over to Jamestown. Robert Hunt is the chaplain to Jamestown. What is the first thing they do when they get off the ship? And thank God they're on firm land again. They tie up a sail and share the Eucharist on these new shores. So that's how that branch of that tree reaches to us and where we get started. Again, moving quickly, it's time of revolution. We're going to break away from our mother in England, and that put the Anglican Church in this new world in a very difficult predicament. How are you going to be the Church of England in a country that was rejecting the mother? So how do you begin to move forward after that? And so that's where William Holland Wilmer is a huge figure in helping us to reclaim a voice in the new world. He believed that we had a voice that needed to be heard, a moderate voice in Christianity that was both evangelical in the sense of preaching the Word and knowing the Word, but also sacramental. So Catholic and Reformed together in this new world. Easier said than done. Remember that more than half of the clergy were loyalists. They left to either go to Canada or back to England. Those who were left were working really hard because there were so few. There was no way to train and educate clergy here, and if you could do that, you couldn't get them ordained. There were no bishops, so think about how difficult it was. So William Holland Wilmer served the church at a time when the church in Virginia was probably at its lowest ebb. After the Revolution, people were wondering, there were many obituaries written for the Episcopal Church in these new United States. How could it stand? At once somewhat established, now not established at all. Buildings were falling into ruin. There were 3 years in a row that the Diocese of Virginia couldn't hold a council, couldn't gather to meet because they couldn't get a quorum. They couldn't get people to show up. Again, Dr. Wilmer had a vision, and he believed that the way that we were going to turn this around had to do with belief in God, that we had a message to give, and about training leaders. And so that leads to the founding of the seminary. I'm jumping ahead of myself. What I'd like to do is see another section of the video that talks about the beginning and foundation of the church. And then, oh, I'm sorry, I skipped way over. Back to that tree. This is Greg Milliken's creation of that tree, told you, from early Christianity. And many of you know that Ian and I have co-authored a textbook on ministry. And we finished the book, sent it into the publisher, only to be told that essentially, you know, this book is probably many millennials are going to read this book. You don't have enough graphs, you don't have enough pictures, you don't need some blurs. And so we gathered again and sat at the dean's office and struggled through how to do this. And this was one of the ideas we came up with. And Greg very quickly did this on his computer. And we thought, this is just splendid and wonderful. We sent it off to the publisher. Then when we get the book, we realize what we've done. And you'll notice that there's a direct line from Jesus to the Episcopal Church. Okay, now back to the story of the building. And I know the audio is not good, so you have to listen very carefully. You'll see figures. Ruth Lincoln Cave. If you didn't know Ruth Lincoln Cave, she was our historian who wrote 2 volumes of our history. We wouldn't have many of these stories if it weren't for Ruth, and there are others as well.
And this presentation we put on the website too, if you want to go back and revisit.
William Wilmer was a creative and energetic young priest. He had the foresight and vision to help the church to grow, and the church indeed did grow. It outgrew the little meeting house on South Fairfax Street, and he had the vision to purchase this land here at the corner of Duke and South Pitt Streets. He also had the ability to contract one of the nation's finest architects to build the new church.
We had a member named, a nephew of George Washington, our president. His name was Bushrod Washington. He was a Supreme Court Justice. Apparently he's the one who contacted Benjamin Henry Latrobe, an outstanding architect who was living in Washington and had rebuilt the White House.
First, I'd like to describe a little bit about the life of Benjamin Latrobe and how he arrived here in the States. He was born of Moravian parents who were both educators in England, and he studied Moravian education, traveled extensively, visited Rome, France, and then went back to practice architecture in England. He was also a very gifted engineer and an artist. He came to Virginia actually in the late 1790s, and then worked his way up through Virginia, actually worked for a little while on the penitentiary in the state of Virginia. He kept beautiful sketchbooks, and his books were of gridded paper, and so he would begin to study buildings as he traveled north. He was very fortunate to meet Thomas Jefferson, and Thomas Jefferson admired his intellect, his rational thinking, and he quickly became a member of Jefferson's inner circle. And it was through the invitation to dinner parties and other opportunities that he was quickly able to establish both a private and a public practice. He was able to get into church architecture through a couple of connections. Again, one of the first connections with Bishop John Carroll in Baltimore. And he was asked by Bishop Carroll to provide a crit of a quick sketch that someone had done for a potential cathedral. And so he quickly prepared a sketch and showed it to Bishop Carroll that it could be substantially improved. And then he went on to prepare two designs for Bishop Carroll. And the first design was of a Gothic design, which he didn't prefer. He thought it was a miniature. He prepared a design based on Roman principles, a beautiful dome over a square, and this was eventually constructed. He also designed St. John's Lafayette Square, which is a beautiful Episcopal church, again based on Roman principles of a dome with a lantern over the assembly. And it was through the connection with St. John's, I believe, that he was then able to receive the commission through Dr. Wilmer here to design St. Paul's.
He was paid the extraordinary sum of $17 for his work, and we don't have any of his drawings. All the drawings and the records from that time have been destroyed. The church was built with pew rents at the time. We have about 100 pews, and the pew rents were what we paid the minister with. That was his salary.
His design process was a lot like the process that the architects use today. And he was really our first professional architect in the United States, and that's one of the reasons that the profession admires him so. He felt that through his knowledge and his skill, that he should be hired to design a building and then see that and be paid separately, working for the client to be paid separately. And then there would be a builder that would build the drawings, build the building in accordance to his drawings. And before Latrobe, many of the buildings here in the U.S. were built by very good masons or carpenters who in fact provided their own drawings to the vestry to construct a church. And so he separated that. He wanted that separation, and he also wanted the ability to hire the builder and to control the construction. So his process was extremely advanced for the early 1800s. He met Reverend Wilmer, then they had this property upon which to build a church. And he, I think, fairly quickly developed this beautiful Victorian building, Gothic in style, that is on Pitt Street here today. And it's a great example of Gothic church architecture in the United States. It's a real treasure. I believe the design process took 4 or 5 years, I believe the building was finished in around 1816. Mr. Latrobe really was not that involved in the construction process. He would prefer to have been involved in the construction process, but the vestry chose for him to prepare the designs, and that they would have a builder, Mr. Bosworth, build the church, and that he was really not that needed during the construction. It did cause friction. He would prefer to have been here quite a lot, really, to help. He was very knowledgeable of plaster work, brick construction, felt that his value was there to be on site. And then he learned of some changes that the vestry had made to his rather simple, what he thought very rational and pure design. The first thing the church did that really upset him was lower the height of this building by 18 inches. That really upset him because everything was extremely proportional. That the original plan was a square, the height was 1/3 of the square. He had all these proportions that he thought were based on Greek and Roman principles, and that they were innately beautiful. And so for someone to lower it 18 inches without telling him, it wasn't right. And then he further found out that they were going to add a balcony, and that caused the church to change the windows on the first floor to rectangles instead of the Gothic arches that he had recommended. And so he wasn't upset at all about firing off letters back and forth to his clients.
I think it my duty to you to advise you to take down the whole of the galleries erected for the accommodation of your black brethren, upon whom in proportion much more will be spent than upon the handsomest part of your white congregation. After all this expense, the poor blacks will be badly off. For although it is said, "Blessed are they who do not see yet believe," yet it would be better that even the black people should see the clergyman. And I much doubt whether it will be possible for any of them, except those in the front row, to see him at all. Besides, those under the corner of the arch of the ceiling will be very badly off indeed. Perhaps it will be enough to show that the thing will be expensive, ugly, and inconvenient to induce you to pull it down before you spend any more money upon it. For pull it down you certainly will, sometime or the other.
I think this is an important church in the lineage of church architecture because it's one of the first Gothic-style churches in America for a parish. It demonstrated that the Gothic style of architecture could be adapted to this beautiful use. Latrobe was aware of the beautiful Gothic cathedral in Milan. He was aware of the small country churches in England, and he felt the Gothic style, would fit in religious space, for religious space. And there are just very few of them of this vintage, and so I think that's the reason it's so important, because there are just so few in the early 1800s of this style. And then when you place Latrobe's name on top of that, that really raises the bar.
The new church was built within a year's time at a cost of $29,000 and was consecrated in May of the year 1818. William Wilmer left his mark not only at St. Paul's but on the church in Virginia.
Nothing so powerfully recommends religion to the favorable acceptance of mankind as its faithful delineation in a pious and exemplary life. Many there are who will not read the Bible, but they cannot shut their eyes against the light of a holy life. As therefore so much depends upon our conduct in this view, how careful should we be to let our light so shine before men that they, seeing our good works, may glorify God.
After leaving the Washington area, he was called to be the rector of Bruton Parish in Williamsburg and the president of the College of William and Mary. Soon afterward, however, he died of fever. He accomplished all these many things, before dying at the age of 44.
One of the things that wasn't covered about Latrobe in this report was the friendship that he had with William Holland Wilmer, which was deep, even amidst all those angry letters coming back and forth. Many of them were directed to Churchill's family members who were the wardens at the time, so they were largely receiving those angry letters. But there was always, I never thought about it before, but always a bit of a sense of humor. We got a sense of that. And they could be rather terse, but also quite warm. They called each other Henry and William, so there was a sort of close affection there. And remember that Dr. Will, the reason that St. John's Lafayette Square was built by Latrobe was because of that friendship. So Dr. Will started that parish, and what for a time was rector of both parishes, and Latrobe was the organist at St. John's Lafayette Square. So a true Renaissance man. And there was a point in time where it was very clear that he couldn't do both jobs, and was offered the job at St. John's, but decided he would rather stay here in Alexandria. All right, we don't know much more about that. What do we got now, guys?
During our most recent renovation, this foundation beneath Latrobe's north wall has been exposed for the first time. It's symbolic to us of the sure and solid foundation upon which our church is built. As we celebrate our first 2 centuries of ministry, the future is bright for us. We are well positioned to continue our work of making disciples, to worship God, to serve the world in God's name, and to care for one another. We are poised in our 3rd century to continue our God-given mission to shine as a light in the world to the glory of God.
Final thoughts. One thing I wanted to do was to highlight the window there. And one of the things that Latrobe hated was that the building was shrunk 18 inches, and the 18 inches were taken off right there. Those windows would have been arched like all the other arches that you could see, so that theme would have been carried out. I, for one, am glad he lost the argument about the gallery. I like the gallery. And Mr. Bosworth, who was the contractor, gets very little credit. We should probably talk a lot about him. Not only did he sort of work away to do this building in such a short time, he's the one who designed that lovely frieze work that's on the gallery that again carries out the arch themes all the way throughout the very fine detail of the work. And one other thing to say, Ruth Kay always took issue with Latrobe's letter about the gallery. She claims that the gallery was never ever used as a slave gallery. That was not its intention. It was never used that way. And part of the argument that she has was the existence of Mead Memorial Church, that there was a parish for persons of color in Alexandria. And she also talks about in her book the Sunday school, very old, long-standing Sunday school, has changed throughout the years. But one of the things that happened is that we changed as the populations changed. There was once a Chinese Sunday school at St. Paul's when many of the Chinese workers were here and working down on the waterfront, and a school for educating black children, even when it was illegal in Virginia, continued to work here at St. Paul's. Let's now stop for comments, questions. I want to make sure there's time for you to look at the archive materials, so I'll touch that.
Just to add one thing, I'm sure you remember this, but sometime in the recent past year or so, I heard somebody say, and it's consistent with what you just said, that Latrobe had designed the front of the church as a golden rectangle, which is a certain rectangle thought to be the most beautiful one. And when they lowered it by 18 inches, of course, they destroyed that portion.
Yeah, very upset about that. And he also said something really funny about, to the pastor in one of those letters, said, you know, all you really care about essentially is the curb appeal, what the thing looks like in the front. It looks like a barn, and the rest of the 3 sides, which were never finished, you know, so the front was finished, the back sides were not.
Why did they lower it 18 inches?
Save money. Just fewer bricks. It's about that for their eyes and change.
Yeah.
There's a church in London that is very much like St. Paul's, except it has pillars instead of the Gothic. And many people think that was the...
Yeah, Ruth claims that St. James Piccadilly was the model of the interior, and then Peterborough Cathedral for the exterior, which has those three large exterior arches, the bigger one in the middle, and a narrow narthex like ours. Incidentally, our narthex is so narrow and so thick because it was designed to hold bells in the top, but we've never had bells. But we have the ability, the weight to be able to distribute in that.
Was there any reason why St. Paul's and the Catholic Church were not built on Main Street instead of back off of Main Street?
No, I don't know why they decided. I mean, I wonder that part of it was that this space was available as it continued. Town continued to expand both the westward and south and north. But this always was a neighborhood church. And one of the reasons we know that is that when the church was on Fairfax Street, they wanted to stay within this quadrant.
Because in Dublin, the Roman Catholic Church wasn't allowed to build on the Main Street.
But St. Mary's is the oldest Roman church in Virginia.
But that used to be a Methodist.
Yeah, very well.
I was wondering why the congregation made the decision to sort of keep the road out of the building process. I wonder if it's because they knew maybe it cost too much and they were going to alter what he designed and they just didn't want him bugging
Tom
them.
alluded to that in his comments that Lefebvre was the first professional architect. There really was no one that just designed buildings and then, left it to someone else. So it was kind of a new profession. And it wasn't that it was difficult to get from Washington to Alexandria. And so it's easier to fire off a letter than to come here in person. But he did make trips back and forth, and that's when fire started. Helen.
I was thinking in terms of director's choice to stay in Alexandria. Alexandria within the easier, more commercial community